Did you know that the Chinese yuan has recently overtaken the US dollar to become the most traded currency in Russia? However, that's not all. Other countries are also following suit. In fact, Malaysia and Beijing are already in talks to reduce their reliance on the greenback. But the real question is, can the Chinese currency really end the global dominance of the US dollar? That's what we're going to talk about in today's video, and we'll discuss whether the Chinese yuan has what it takes to replace the US dollar as the world's leading currency, or if it's just a matter of speculation. So watch the video until the end, and if you are new to the channel, subscribe to it and hit the bell icon so you won't miss any future videos we upload. Getting back to the video, China's economy has reached some amazing heights compared to other countries. In fact, only the United States has a higher gross domestic product, GDP, than China, which sits at an impressive $17.7 trillion. Plus, China is the third biggest trading country worldwide, just behind the US and the European Union. But get this, even with all that success, China's currency, the yuan, only accounts for about 3% of world commerce. That's a pretty small number compared to the US dollar, which has a massive 87% market share. So, even though China is doing really well economically, they still have a long way to go to catch up with the US dollar's dominance. But that also doesn't mean that the yuan can't capture the market from the dollar in the near future. And even though China is pretty strong both politically and economically, it doesn't have complete control over the worldwide flow of fiat money. But they're trying to change that. They've come up with a huge plan, worth trillions of dollars and last for decades, to try and replace the US dollar as the world's reserve currency. But before we get into all the details, let's take a moment to discuss how one currency becomes dominant in the market. Well, there isn't any formal procedure to earn the status of a global currency. It's more like a popularity contest. The currency that is used the most in international trade and business across borders ends up becoming the reserve currency. And what makes a currency popular is the impression of a country's safety and its ability to handle economic ups and downs. The reserve currency is the currency that most central banks around the world want to keep in reserve, and the dominant currency is the one that gets that title. There have been 6 significant eras of reserve currency since 1450. Portugal was the dominant power in global reserves before Spain's rise to power in the 1530s. The Dutch guilder and French franc were the top currencies in international commerce during the 17th and 18th centuries. But then, the British pound became the reserve currency from the start of World War I until its end. In the end, the US dollar took the place of the British pound as the US economy became more powerful than Britain's. Since 2008, US dollars have been used in more than 75% of all financial transactions around the world. Plus, the dollar accounts for more than 60% of all new foreign debt and 59% of all reserves held by the world's central banks. No other currency even comes close to these levels, even though the dollar's grip on these markets has been slipping a bit lately. But get this, even though the Chinese yuan isn't a practical alternative right now, geopolitical and macroeconomic trends point in the direction of its ascendance to the position of dominant currency. China has plans and is already trying to make the renminbi a reserve currency. It's true, they've got a pretty big economy and a lot of trade, so it makes sense that they want their currency to be used more around the world. But there's a catch. They need other countries to start keeping their reserves in yuan. To make that happen, China's central bank, the People's Bank of China, announced in July 2022 that they're teaming up with 5 other countries and the Bank for International Settlements. They're working on something called the renminbi liquidity arrangement, and each of the countries involved, China, Indonesia, Malaysia, Hong Kong, Singapore, and Chile, will contribute about $2.2 billion. Even Chile is getting in on the action. Interestingly, the yuan is already being used as a de facto reserve currency in Russia. After getting hit with sanctions from the West for their invasion of Ukraine, Russia started looking to China for help. Now, about 17% of their foreign reserves are denominated in yuan, and the currency is the 3rd most popular on the Moscow exchange. So it seems like the yuan's role as a reserve currency could grow even stronger as China and Russia continue to work together. While the yuan still has a long way to go before it can challenge the US dollar's dominance as the world's reserve currency, the progress it has made in recent years is remarkable. And with China's growing economic clout and increasing efforts to internationalize the renminbi, it's possible that the yuan could become a major player in global finance in the years to come. But there are still a lot of problems that need to be fixed, such as making the currency more liquid and putting an end to worries about China's economic and political stability. Still, it's clear that China wants the renminbi to be a force in the world of finance, and the steps it's taken so far show that it's well on its way to achieving this goal. Even though the US dollar is still the most widely used currency in international trade, countries are now starting to use other currencies for international trade and payments. Datuk Seri Anwar Ibrahim, the Prime Minister of Malaysia, said in front of Parliament that there is no reason for Malaysia to keep using the dollar and that China has shown interest in setting up an Asian monetary fund to reduce reliance on the US dollar and the IMF. The Malaysian leader also mentioned that the country's central bank is making preparations to discuss trade concerns using the ringgit, Malaysia's currency, and the yuan. Yuan has also been approved for use in Brazil's trade settlements and investment transactions with China. In fact, the yuan has already surpassed the euro to take the position of the second most significant currency in Brazil's foreign reserves. Until 2018, Brazil's foreign reserves did not include any Chinese currency. Nevertheless, by the end of 2022, the Chinese currency accounted for 5.37% of the total holdings of the Brazilian central bank. In addition, Saudi Arabia expressed its willingness to engage in discussions over the possible sale of its oil in currencies other than the dollar. It has already been confirmed by the Wall Street Journal that the country that is wealthy in oil is also reportedly in talks with China to take yuan for part of the sales of its oil. And if that happens, then the yuan is going to get a great push against the US dollar. Apart from that, Iran said in July last year that it would no longer use the US dollar in its commercial dealings with Russia, and would instead use the ruble as its currency of choice going forward. Moreover, it revealed that it has similar intentions for commerce with the countries of India, Turkey, and China. Also, Beijing has been pushing the use of the local currency in trade settlement and financial transactions via the BRICS Collective, which consists of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. The People's Bank of China has given its approval to 31 different banks located in 29 different countries or regions to clear yuan transactions. According to the data provided by China's Ministry of Commerce, the total value of the commodity transactions that were paid in yuan in 2022 was around 7.92 trillion yuan, 1.15 trillion US dollars, representing an increase of 37.3% from the previous year. Now the question is, how far is the yuan from becoming the dominant international currency? Well, for that, a bunch of smart economists from different places, like the University of California in Berkeley and the Banque Centrale de France, teamed up to study if the yuan could be a reserve currency. And guess what? They found out that finding a substitute for the dollar wouldn't be easy or fast, but they did see that more and more countries were holding yuan reserves, especially those that traded more with China. This means that as China's trade relationships grow, the yuan could become more important, which could make it a good alternative to the US dollar as a currency. There is a chance that China will eventually make the dollar less important, which would have a big effect on world finance. According to the authors of the research, the present status of the renminbi is comparable to that of the United States dollar in the 1950s. This suggests that it may not take more than a few decades until the yuan reaches parity with other currencies. Last but not least, it is not possible to predict when the yuan will overtake the US dollar as the world's reserve currency. Nonetheless, multiple variables point to a probable upheaval in the global monetary environment. China's economic impact has continuously grown, and it has emerged as a key actor in global commerce. But dominating the dollar would take the yuan decades, which is unlikely to happen in the near future. That's all for today's video, guys. What do you think of today's video? Tell us your views in the comments section. Thank you very much for taking the time to watch this video. See you in the next video. Until then, cheers.